April 19th, 2006, item number 143. Today's guest is Scott Sigler from the Podiobook, Infection.
Podcast411.com. Listen different.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Rob, and this is the Podcast 411 podcast. Before we get into our interview with Scott, a couple of quick news and notes. As always, if you'd like to get a hold of us, send us comments, feedback, rants, or tech tips, you can call 206-666-4357. That's 206-666-HELP. Or you can send the feedback to podcast411@gmail.com. I'd like to thank everyone who's sending congrats on the baby. It is greatly appreciated, and it's great to hear from everyone. I noticed yesterday over at FeedBurner, they have a new report that came out about the total number of podcast feeds that they manage and the growth of those feeds over the last year plus. In addition to that, they also have an aggregate number of the total subscribers to podcasts. The total number of podcasters that they tracked at the end of March was 44,889 or something like that. And the total number of aggregate subscribers was 1.6 million. If you do the math, that works out to 35 subscribers per podcast. If you take out the top 100 podcasts, that number comes down to less than 30 subscribers per podcast. Now, granted, probably half the feeds are dead feeds. That brings the average number up to somewhere around 60 subscribers per podcast. So if your podcast has more than 60 subscribers, you're doing better than the average. I'll have a link to that report over at FeedBurner in the show notes. If you're a podcaster, it's really a good read. For anyone in the Kansas City area, on Tuesday, April 25th, I'll be the keynote speaker at the Kansas City Joint Technology Conference, Spring 2006. This will be at the Hereford House, and if you're interested in going to this, shoot me an email at podcast411@gmail.com, and I'll give you the information about how to attend. What I think is great about this opportunity is for podcasters in general is that they asked me, a podcaster, to be the keynote speaker, whereas they have some other speakers there from Microsoft and Sprint. So when podcasters are put ahead of people from Microsoft and Sprint, two of the largest corporations in the United States, that's a pretty good thing. Okay, now on to the important announcement. As many longtime listeners know, one of my other passions besides podcasting is poker. And this Saturday, April 22nd, there's going to be a podcast poker tournament. I'm going to have a link in the show notes to that. It's over at podcastpokerchallenge.com. And you, as a podcaster, have the opportunity to sign up as a podcaster and then get your listeners to sign in and be part of the tournament. Podcasts that bring in the most listeners will then get their own personal tournament. This is a free roll tournament. Free roll means there's no cost to anyone. So it's a completely free podcast tournament. But there's actually real money, $2,000 of real money being given away. Doesn't cost you anything to play, and you have an opportunity to win some real money. If you are a listener and you'd like to sign up, make sure you pick Podcast 411 as the podcast you heard it from. What that does is gives me an opportunity down the line to get my own tournament just for my listeners. There's a link in the show notes. DJ Quad set this up. If you're not familiar with DJ Quad, he's the one that sets up the poker tournaments for Keith and the Girl podcast. Again, this is no cost. No, I'm not making any money out of this. This is for you guys to have some fun. And if you like poker, or even if you've never played before and you want to, you've watched it on television, you want to get into it, here's your chance to play a Texas Hold'em, no limit poker tournament for free and have a chance to win a share of $2,000 cash. Again, that's podcastpokerchallenge.com. There's a link in the show notes. One other piece of information, if you're the one that knocks me out, you get a $50 bonus for knocking me out of the tournament. And it's this Saturday, April 22nd at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Additionally, you have until tomorrow, Thursday, April 20th, to sign up as a podcaster to get your listeners to sign up. And your listeners have, I guess, until game time and to sign up for the actual tournament. But if you're a podcaster and you want to sign up and then have your listeners sign up, you have until sometime on April 20th to get that done. Okay, well now it's time to get into our interview with Scott Sigler. Before we do so, here's a promo from his new Podiobook, Infection.
Someone is torturing Perry Dawsey, cutting into him piece by piece, slicing him open, spilling his blood, removing parts of his body, one little bit at a time. Who would do such a thing to poor Perry Dawsey? None other than Perry Dawsey himself. If he doesn't start cutting faster, he won't make it through the day.
You didn't know!
Infection is the horrifying new podcast novel from me, Scott Sigler, author of Ancestor and Earthcore. Infection drops March 11th, so sign up now at scottsigler.podshow.com or subscribe to the feed directly at feeds.feedburner.com/Scott Sigler.
Scott, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
And it's been about 10 months since you were last on here.
That's an eternity in podcast time.
Well, you've been a very busy boy in those past 10 months.
Had quite a bit going on. We finished up Earthcore, and then I put out Ancestor, which was the second podcast novel. And right now we're working on Infection.
Right. And we'll get into talking about Infection here in a few minutes. But since you've already been on the show, I'll replace the first question with a new first question for you, and that is, what was the first sci-fi or horror novel you ever read?
I mean, probably some type of, teen-level scholastic books. Nothing really sticks in my head too much. The first one I ever read that really kind of resonated was Stephen King's Silver Bullet, which I bought for my mom for Christmas because she was a Stephen King fan. And then I started peeking through it and wound up reading the whole thing. And it was kind of funny because she would come into my room. This is I was in junior high, and she would come into my room, and I would quickly put the book under the desk, and she thought I was reading something naughty, but actually I was reading her Christmas present. Didn't want her to see what it was, but I just couldn't put it down, and I had to finish the thing.
Here you go, Ma. Don't worry about the fact that the binder's already bent out of shape.
Exactly.
Since we last talked, what are some new podcasts that you're now listening to?
Well, I'm starting to get into other people's Podiobooks. I've been listening to, obviously I finished up T. Morris's Moravian, Mark Jeffries' The Pocket Independent, and been listening to one by Chris Hutchins called Seventh Son, and that's great. It's about, 8 episodes in at this point. It's excellent, really well done book, and started listening to Spherical Tomie by Jack Mangan. That's the kind of podcast I kick out, so it seems likely that that's the kind of thing I like to listen to. And then still listening to some NPR stuff, Science Friday, still a big Dawn and Drew fan. I listen to that as much as I can. And then from there, it's just there's so many good quality podcasts out there now. It's just a matter of trying to grab things and listen to them as much as you can. You can't really stay up on everything.
Let's talk now a little bit about Infection and tell everyone what the basic premise is on Infection.
Well, Infection is a story of a gentleman named Perry Dawsey, who's a really big fella. He's 6'5", 265-pound ex-linebacker from the University of Michigan, and he's spent his whole life trying to break the cycle of violence that has enveloped his family. He's really trying to become a better person, and he's the protagonist, but he winds up being infected by this organism, and you get to watch the progression of this organism take him over as the book unfolds. And this organism is a biological entity. It taps into his bloodstream and takes nutrients out of his blood, so it feeds off him, and it taps into his nervous system. And there's 7 of these things on him, so they tap into his nervous system and basically use his nervous system as a kind of internet so they can communicate back and forth with each other across his body. He is infected by these things when they're in their microscopic stage, so they're very embryonic, and they start to grow into his body, and they actually wind up tapping into his brain to get information out of him. And they tap into his 7th cochlear nerve, which is the 7th vertebra, and that is the auditory nerve. So they start to send signals to him, and he hears this just as you or I would hear normal talking. So poor Perry is hearing voices in his head, but they're actually real voices that are telling him to do things. So the crux of it all is that in order for these things to communicate better, they flood his body with neurotransmitters to make their communication over his nervous system more effective. And the side effects of that are massive paranoia, psychotic behavior, and these things don't play well for a really large, strong man who has serious violent urges and control problems. So it winds up being a story of his degradation and how he tries to maintain control of his sanity as these things try and take him over.
Now, I am all caught up. I've listened to all the episodes so far, and I'm really enjoying it. And damn you, Scott, another freaking one of your books that I've gotten hooked on. Like, I have time for this. But
That's the goal. That's the goal right there.
I noticed you had a little homage in there to Gary Leland.
Yeah, Gary from Podcast Pickle who's been just so nice to me and helped me promote Ancestor quite a bit and has such a great site over there. He kept IMing me saying, hey, make me a character in your book, make me a character in your book.
Yeah, tell everybody what kind of character you made Gary.
We made Gary a corpse.
Yeah.
He's a dead character in the book. And I get that request a lot. People are like, put me in your book, but...
You know, I would say a dead corpse that was a grumpy old man. As you described him. So I when I first heard you mention Gary, I think it was maybe episode 2, I started laughing. You mentioned him again in episode 4. So I was like, oh, yep, there's definitely no doubt about it.
He gets a couple other name drops in there, but people will ask to be put into the book as a character, except all my characters are basically horrible people that do horrible things. So I try not to make any of the characters someone I actually know, because I don't want them to come back and go, oh, come on. I mean, I would never do that. It's bad enough that I named Perry Dossey's father Irv, and that's my dad's name is Irv. And my dad read Infection, and he got done with it. He goes, well, now everybody's going to think I beat you all the time when you were a kid. So that's where I learned my lesson. I'm like, I'm not naming active characters after people ever again.
Is Perry, that you know of, the first fictional character that's a podcaster?
I believe he is, yeah. Yeah, I put that out there and waited to see if people would find it. Then a couple people found it. He has his own podcast, and the fun thing with him is going to be he's going to keep doing the podcast as the book progresses. So it's like a podcast in real time for him as a character.
Is there okay? So there really is a podcast out there per the name. Okay,
it's called.
No, you got to read if you want to find Perry's podcast. You have to go and listen to the novel, folks. We're not going to give it away. So it's an Easter egg that's got hidden there, and you got to go find it on your own. I know you mentioned people love to find mistakes. When we first did the first interview, you said people love to find discontinuities or mistakes in whatever you talk about. And I noticed already you started playing some of those feedback. And I thought I had you on one because you mentioned he was from Sheboygan. I'm like, wait, Sheboygan's in Wisconsin. And I Googled, and sure enough, there's a Sheboygan, Michigan. So
that's right.
I was like, darn.
That's actually my hometown where I grew up. So, yep, I'm able to make a few references to life in Sheboygan, which is not exactly a metropolis. So.
No, I just saw the Sheboygan, Michigan lighthouse. Found that Googling.
You got it.
Yeah, but I in college, I had a roommate who was from Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and all we called him was Sheboygan. Matter of fact, I couldn't even tell you what his real name was because we just called him Sheboygan.
Yeah, it's a pretty good nickname word.
With the episodes, how often do you plan on releasing new episodes?
I'm trying to do it every week. They come out every Sunday. Had a couple of technical snags with Infection, like in episode 3 where I finished recording it and then went to distill it and realized that I had deleted the entire main vocal track and had to go back and redo 4 hours worth of work. So that kept me till Monday, but every week, and I put them out on Sundays.
What is some of the feedback that you've been getting this time around? How has the feedback been?
Feedback's been really solid so far. People really like the character of Perry, and a lot of the people who are listening to Infection have listened to Earthcore and Ancestor, so they're kind of familiar with my style, and they know that Perry's in for a rough time. A lot of the feedback is people just anticipating what's going to happen to him and talking about how they can feel the book building up already, and they're excited to see what's going to happen, and then they yell at me because I only do it once a week, and they want their stuff faster than that. So I get a lot of email people bitching about they want their fix sooner. Can I put out 2 episodes in a week? And then the other feedback I get is a lot of people emailing, phoning in, and even sending video that every time they get a little itch on their skin now, that they're freaking out. They're just the story's just realistic enough to make them wonder when they start to scratch at that random itch. They're going, okay, is that going to turn into something horrible? So even though they haven't seen what's going to happen to Perry just yet, it's really funny that when their skin itches, they're thinking of the book. So I take that as a pretty big compliment.
I actually can relate to that. I was yesterday listening to 2 of the episodes, and I was out gardening and doing yard work, and my legs were starting to itch, and I was thinking, as I'm scratching, and you're talking about him scratching, I'm like, oh, this is not good.
That's great.
So I went and made sure I showered really heavy after I got done working out.
Well, hopefully you cleared them all off in time.
Yeah. Let's not forget, tell everyone where to go ahead and find Infection.
Infection is at scottsigler.podshow.com, and that's Scott, 2 T's, and SIGLER.podshow.com. And it's a free podcast. It's like getting a free audiobook, so you can just go there and you can listen in.
What are some of the things that you learned doing Earth Core and Ancestor that are helping you when you're doing Infection as a Podiobook?
Well, a lot of what I learned with Earth Core and Ancestor is just kind of the staging process, getting your intro done, getting your outro done, and having those available to just drag into the file. And then some other things I've learned is just better ways to do the production and using sound effects and vocal effects to convey different things. There's a lot of people talking over the phone in my books, or talking while they're stuck inside hazmat suits, or talking over walkie-talkies. So just a couple little tweaks really sell that to the listener. You know, I can say, Scott said into the walkie-talkie, go pick up the shovel, and the guy on the other end says, okay, I've got it. And unless they hear that walkie-talkie tone, it doesn't really communicate what's going on. So just a few little sound effects in there really help put the book across without making it a full-blown audio drama. It's still a regular audio book, just with a few extra bells and whistles.
Are you still doing it in GarageBand?
I'm using GarageBand 3.0 now, considering getting away from that, but it's still a pretty solid program. It works quite well.
As long as you don't delete tracks.
As long as you don't delete tracks. It's got a couple of bad things to it, like when you finish recording, and if you go click on another sound segment, it keeps the original recording bit selected, which is how I wound up deleting the whole track.
Yeah.
So unless you really pay attention, you can accidentally delete stuff left and right.
Unfortunately, you have to watch out for that stuff between the chair and the keyboard. Sometimes that'll really get you. When we last talked, you said one of the things you were going to do for Ancestor was that you were going to go ahead and cast out all the voices in the book ahead of time. Did you wind up doing that? And did you do that also for Infection? And did you find that helped?
It helped for Ancestor. I got a little bit of practice in, but not enough. I mean, I really need to put the problem with doing this as the hobby is real life gets in the way. I probably need a couple of weeks to practice the different voices beforehand. And Ancestor, I got a little bit of practice in. For Infection, I actually tried something different entirely. I put a vocal effect on the main character's voice because he's a really big guy, so I put an effect on it so it would drop it by a perfect third or something like that in GarageBand to really connotate those different people. The problem I'm running into now is people have listened to all three books, and there's only so many voices I can do. And even in the beginning of Ancestor, I used a voice that was similar to one of the characters in Earth Core, and I got a ton of emails going, hey, wait a minute, you used that character already. And I'm like, it's a completely different character. It just happens to be a similar voice, but people remember the voices. And so now I'm not just creating original voices, I'm trying to find a way to differentiate them from the 25 characters I've done in the past. So for the next book, I don't know what I'm going to do, but it's going to take a lot of practice ahead of time.
Maybe next time you have to hire some people to do some of the voices for you.
That's definitely possible.
Get them to volunteer.
I may have to hire the wife to help out because the most ripping I get from the fans is on my female voices. So they think that stuff's pretty funny. I think they're just good enough that the listeners don't get thoroughly annoyed. I mean, they're listening to it going, I wish this was a little better, but then they think that, then they totally forget about it and they get sucked into the story. I think in the end, with a Podiobook, all that really matters is when character A talks, he sounds like character A. When character B talks, she sounds like character B. I think they acclimate to it very quickly.
Let's go back and talk a little bit about Earth Core. Since it's been done and released, it is now available as a print novel. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, the print book came out in December of last year, and it's available on Amazon.com and at some bookstores. And it was published by Dragon Moon Press, and they're doing a pretty good job of promoting it. It actually is a finalist for the 2005 Forward Magazine Book of the Year, which is kind of a real shock. And Forward Magazine is a magazine that reviews independently published books like small press books. So they're not going to touch anything by HarperCollins or Del Rey, but they'll touch all of the some mid-level publishers and some small press like Dragon Moon is. So it's out in print. It's been doing extremely well on Amazon.com. I mean, if you go to Amazon.com and just search for Earth Core, it'll pop right up. It's not a Stephen King level success by any stretch of the imagination, but we're pretty happy with it. It's doing quite well so far. Also, we've taken that existing Earth Core content, the audio content, and we put it on iTunes as a paid download. So now for $10, you can download the whole thing, and the quality's just awesome, and you can download it in iTunes and listen to it anytime you want. And then it's even still available still on Podiobooks.com for free if you want to get one episode a week. So we're really trying to get it out there and get it in some different markets. And we even did a series Bible for it, had that in front of the Sci-Fi channel, and they were considering a series for Earth Core for a little while. and then decided that their new strategy is to do more shows like Lost and the 4400, more realistic science fiction, I guess you say. They're getting away from the space opera type stuff. If anybody wants to see it on the Sci-Fi Channel, start emailing the Sci-Fi Channel and tell them you want to see Earth Core as a series.
How are the sales going?
They're going pretty well. We've sold about 2,000 copies of it so far, and those numbers are great. I mean, my goal was I was trying to sell 1 in 10 listeners to go buy a book, or come up roughly that number, and Earth Core finished up with about 10,000, well, over 10,000 listeners for the final episode. So having sold that many, we're doing pretty good. I mean, it's 20% of the people who listen to it roughly are buying the book or getting someone they know to buy the book. So I think it's doing extremely well. And then when Ancestor comes out in print in 2007, we had 20,000 people for Ancestor. So, I mean, you can see where the numbers will start to increase, and this could potentially become a bigger deal. Podshow tells me we've got somewhere between 20 and 25,000 listening to Infection right now. Hopefully that one can blow up a little bit bigger. So that's still the basic plan, is give the content away as a podcast and then put out the print book to follow it up. Now that it's got some brand name recognition and word of mouth and people are talking about it, telling their friends about it, and then see how many of the print books you can sell.
On the promotion side, you've done a lot to go out and promote. What are some things that you found been most effective in promoting your stories?
Interviews on different podcasts have been really big. Those have been key. I mean, there are a few million people listening to these things, and you may think you've got crossover audience, but sometimes you don't. Even on something like Escape Pod, where I've had a story on Escape Pod, and I've promoted Escape Pod, and Escape Pod has promoted me back in Ancestor. I recently got Stephen Ely to play a promo for Infection on Escape Pod, and even though there's that incestuous relationship already, I picked up like 250 new listeners immediately. It was like an immediate increase in my subscription level. There's so many new people coming in to listen to podcasts all the time that even if you can get mentioned on a show that's mentioned you before, you're going to pick up new listeners as people are going to pick that up. One of the things I used early on with Earth Core was press releases to talk about different milestones. The milestone of being the first podcast-only novel, hitting 5,000 listeners was a big one, and it got picked up on different blogs and different online sites, and then it started to increase the number of eyeballs that you got in front of. I don't know how well that's going to work anymore because there's so many podcasts and so many podcasts putting out press releases. You really need some kind of unique angle on it to get any coverage, but still a very cheap way to do things. And now I'm starting to get into the promotion of going and doing book readings for Earth Core, and while doing that, promoting the podcast as well.
When you do book readings, are you going to bookstores? Where are you doing the book readings at?
Well, right now, I'm really in the early stages of it, so they're at bookstores. I mean, I have my second one coming up this Saturday in San Francisco, trying to use the podcast to promote. You want to get your fans from that area out to listen to the thing. So it'll be interesting to see, now that I'm going to these bookstores and I'll get people who aren't familiar with podcasting, what I'm really interested to see is, can I get them listening to the podcast and teach them how to do that?
Having done now 2 1/3, 2 1/4 Podiobooks, what advice would you like to offer out to anyone looking at getting ready to start doing a Podiobook?
The best advice I can offer is go to Podiobooks.com and start listening to the different Podiobooks they have. Of course, after you've listened to my Podiobooks. I mean, you got to listen to Earth Core, Ancestor, and Infection first. Let's not be crazy. You go there, and they have 30 books up right now. They're all author-read, and the first thing you do is you go there and you start listening, and you'll be able to hear it's like, okay, this isn't super pro stuff, but it's good, it's entertaining, and I can do something just like this. The second thing you're going to want to do is use Podiobooks.com as a resource. Email the people at Podiobooks, evo@Podiobooks.com, that's EVO, and ask them if they have their guidelines, because they've got some specs. Here's some equipment you need to use, here's the bit rate you need, here's all that technical information, and that's going to save you an absolute ton of time. And then the final part of that resource is, if you have the drive to go out and get your book recorded and you actually show that you can do it and you're going to finish it, they'll probably list you on Podiobooks.com, and then you get exposed to an audience of 3,000 people and counting who are tuned into that service and listening to it. If you want to do your own audiobook, that's the place to get started.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for coming on the show again.
Thank you for having me. I love being on the show.
Well, folks, that concludes our interview with Scott Sigler from the new Podiobook, Infection. If you haven't checked it out, please go over to scottsigler.net. That's SIGLER, scottsigler.net. Additionally, if you haven't listened to Earth Core or Ancestor, I highly recommend both of those Podiobooks also. Now, I do have this warning for you. If you are someone that has dry, itchy skin, Infection may not be the best book for you because literally it will get under your skin. So remember to stock up on lots of Gold Bond. And this definitely is not for somebody who's suffering from jock itch right now. Coming up at the end of today's show, we have a promo from Erica Huber over at the Grow podcast that's giving real opportunities to women podcast. So please stick around for that. As always, if you have any feedback, comments, tech tips, rants, whatever, give us a call at 206-666-4357 or send those audio clips to podcast411@gmail.com. Our next show will not be up until next Wednesday, April 26th. Until then, this is your host, Rob, from Podcast 411, reminding you to listen different.
With us today, we have Erica Huber, the Executive Director of Giving Real Opportunities to Women. GROW is a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing access to affordable childcare for at-risk mothers and families on welfare and help those mothers pursue a trade, on-the-job training, or a higher degree of education.
It is founded and run by Erica, and she's the host of the podcast. Erica has really been energetic, and she talks a little about her experiences with her organization and her observations in the work that she does.
She's working on providing good information to mothers. Here's somebody who really knows this game, and they're out to help both sides.
Sounds like things are shaking in Cary, Illinois.
She is using a podcast to help single and low-income mothers. She covers topics in the area of parenting and in childhood education.
Topics include autism, IEP negotiation, child advocacy, parenting, and raising a child with special needs. She certainly is passionate about the subject, and I think that she's giving solid advice.
It's good advice just because it's socially wise, and the whole thing is presented in a very open fashion.
I listened to Erica's show this morning, and it was good. I'm not a woman and I'm not growing, but it was a good podcast.
And she is very involved in the community.
Thank you, Erica.
GROW's a great organization. Check them out.
I'm Erica Huber, and thanks for tuning in. For more information and to subscribe to the GROW podcast, visit womengrow.org.